Good morning, Leader.
Good morning. My name is Councillor Martin Hill, Leader of the County Council and Chairman of this Executive Board. So welcome everybody to the first Executive meeting of 2019. Obviously it's been quite some momentous decisions made last night, so we are still trying to digest those, but as soon as we are clear from a County Council point of view, we will update everybody, including the public, of course, what is the effect on our services. So obviously, just to remind everybody, the usual rules will apply with these remote meetings. I'm sure you're all well aware of what they are at the moment. So with that, I'll move straight on to the agenda, and the first one is apologies for absence, please.
Thank you, Leader. And if members could confirm that they are present when their name is called. Councillor Mrs Bradwell.
Present.
Councillor Davey.
Present.
Councillor Davis.
I believe he is due, so we'll have to...
Okay. Councillor Poll. No. Councillor Mrs Woolley.
Present.
Councillor Worth.
Present.
Councillor Young.
Present.
Councillor Parker, Chairman of Overview and Scrutiny Management Board.
Present.
Councillor Linda Wotton, Chairman of the Scrutiny Panel.
Good morning. Present.
Thank you. The following officers are also in attendance: Debbie Barnes, Chief Executive; Ros Cordy, Interim Assistant Director for Adult Frailty and Long-Term Conditions; Andrew Crookham, Executive Director for Resources; James Drury, Executive Director for Commercial; Andy Gutherson, Executive Director for Place; Heather Sandy, Executive Director for Children's Services; and Nigel West of Democratic Services. The only apology for absence I've received, Leader, is from Glenn Garrett, and Ros Cordy is attending in his place.
I think Councillor Davis is with us now, so if you just wants to confirm that, please.
Good morning, everybody. Sorry I'm late.
Okay, thank you. So, any other apologies that we're aware of? In which case, I'll then move on to any announcements which myself or any executive members have. Are there any such announcements? Just to repeat what I said earlier, that obviously with the announcements last night of a new national lockdown, we will be updating everybody in terms of what the effect will be on council services, but I think our initial assessment, it will be minimal as to what is currently happening. But as soon as we see the guidance which the government has, the detailed guidance which the government has promised, we will then pass that on, and hopefully we will be able to carry on delivering services as we are at the moment. Are there any further issues or announcements any of the executive wish to make? Nope. Thank you.
No.
Right, so I then move on to item 4 then, which is the minutes which were held of the meeting which was held on the 1st of December. Obviously we need to just vote on this unless we can just do it by default, but so is there anybody not agreeing that these are a true and accurate record of what happened at that meeting? So if you have an issue, please indicate on the chat function, please. Okay, nobody's indicating, so I'll take it then that is unanimously agreed that the minutes are true and accurate record. Thank you. We now move on to the main item of today's agenda, of course. Although we are in national lockdown, the business of the council must continue and should continue, and that is the council budget for the next financial year, the year 21-22. So what we're doing now is we're going to have a presentation of the details of the budget, which will then go out for recommendation and consultation to the public, and then we'll come back to this meeting next month, and then on to the council meeting in the middle of February. So I'll hand over to Andrew Crookham first, just to give us an outline of what the situation is. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Good morning, members. I'll hand over to Michelle to do a bit of a more detailed run through the proposals in a minute, but I just wanted to open the presentation just to highlight the sort of extreme levels of uncertainty that local government financial planning is being subjected to at the moment as a result of the COVID crisis. As you've already indicated, Leader, there's no parts of our activities that are untouched by COVID, and say finance is nothing different. And there've been a lot of moving parts in putting these proposals together for you to consider today. Not least our general funding, but also funding related to COVID and related to council tax and business rates. You will see that we are presenting proposals that currently show a modest surplus budget for next year, but I just wanted to highlight the risks in presenting that figure to you today. In all likelihood, the figure that we present to you in February will be different to the one presented today, as we have presented figures for council tax and business rates on a provisional basis. That is because the districts don't finalise their figures on those two key funding streams for us until the end of January. We've been working with them very closely throughout the crisis, but I think it's important to note that the impacts on these funding streams, which represent many hundreds of millions of pounds for us, are likely to be impacted not just this year but in future years as a result of the crisis. We've seen that there may be a slow burn economic impact for business closures, not just ones that have closed this year but ones that may close in future years or be impacted in future years, but also the impact on people's ability to pay their council tax bills. The government have been forthcoming in providing a national grant totalling £670 million, which we've benefited up from to the tune of £5 million that is presented in the report today. We'll naturally have to keep a close eye on these key funding streams, not just now but in the future, as well as the full impacts of the crisis become known to us. But as I say, still uncertain parts in the budget, but we have locked in quite a few key of the elements of those now as a result of the provisional settlement that came out in December. So I'll hand over to Michelle to run through some of those more detailed elements, if that's okay, Leader.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you very much, Andrew and Leader. As Andrew said, I'm just going to run through some of the key highlights of the report and flesh out some of the key points in the proposals that are being made. As we've said, that this is the budget proposals that will go on to executive on the 2nd of February following consultation before final recommendations are made to council for the 19th of February. So the main highlights from the spending review from the government and our provisional settlement, I'll just run through a few of these. So what was key was that the review of relative needs, which was formerly known as the Fair Funding Review, and the Business Rates Review and Reset has been deferred again. So we're in a position of another 1 year rollover settlement, which roughly reflects some of the funding that we were party to last year. They set out the council tax referendum limits. So the limits are 2% for general council tax increases, and for authorities such as ourselves with adult social care responsibilities, the opportunity to have an additional 3% precept to cover adult social care costs. So a total possible increase for the Lincolnshire of a 5% council tax limit uplift. Other announcements included public sector pay freeze with flat uplift for lower salaries. We're not directly involved with that, but we do follow on usually with our negotiations in terms of our pay awards. National living wage increase to £8.91 for April 21, which obviously impacts on service delivery for us and our costs for contracts particularly. A new social care grant of £300 million nationally. We were allocated 5.3 million of that, so that's come to us to support social care costs. Government obviously announced ongoing support for COVID and the impacts of COVID. So Andrew just mentioned the council tax support scheme, £670 million made available nationally to support the expected uptake and increased uptake of people applying to get council tax reductions in terms of financial support. So we've had an indicative allocation of just over 5 million for that, which we hadn't planned for. So it's partly responsible for the slight shift that Andrew talked about in our final position for the current for 21-22. The government also announced tax income guarantee for 75% of irrecoverable council tax and business rates losses. So we're awaiting further details of that and what what constitutes irrecoverable ultimately. And the government also announced 1.5 billion to fund additional cost pressures going into 21-22, and we've been allocated 15 million of that. In the February report, we'll flesh out a bit more about what the ongoing pressures we think will likely to be around COVID impacts on our budgets and our costs. Our medium-term position at the moment, when we set the budget in February for the current year, when Council set the budget for the current year, we reported a forecast position for 21-22 to be a shortfall of 13 million. Over the summer, we've reviewed this position, we've looked at the cost pressures and potential savings, and revised quite a number of our assumptions based on the announcements that have been made by government. So the updates from the provisional settlement and the spending review have changed this position for 21-22, and we're now currently forecasting to have a slight surplus of just under 2 million, with a shortfall in future years of 5 million and then rising to 8 million. But as Andrew has said, that's very much reliant on the information we're still waiting for from the district councils on the impact of the collection fund for council tax and business rates and the tax base for future tax income. As we've said, because of the uncertainty, we're only planning to propose to set a detailed budget for 21-22. And details of all of the pressures and savings that we've included in the budget are at Appendix B, which is page 31 of your report. The cost pressures, including pay inflation, equate to just over 26 million. I'll just highlight a couple of the key ones that have been fleshed out in the report there. So adult care and community wellbeing, cost pressures around price inflation, the impact of national living wage increases, and demand on some of our services is around £9 million. On children's services, cost pressures with social care, so looked after children, placement costs around 2 million, and home to school transport, demand and price increases of around 5 million. In place, we have a cost pressure of just over 1 million relating to waste, specifically around the mixed dry recycling contract increases. And in other budgets, we've got some pressures around the lump sum contribution to the local government pension scheme and some reductions in investment income due to inflation rates, which amount to just over 2 million. We've identified just over £13 million worth of savings and additional income in the budget. Most of this is coming from additional income, and we've got a 1-year saving on capital financing to reflect the current spend profile of just over 4 million. But we have not proposed any service reductions as part of that. Is generally efficiencies and additional income. Table B on page 17 sets out all of the service budget lines and the proposals for the 21-22 budget for each service. In terms of council tax, as I've mentioned, the government set out the referendum limits that we can apply. The report proposes to apply a 1.99% general increase for council tax, but not to apply the 3% for adult social care. Whilst the government announced that, they very much highlighted that this was a local decision based on local circumstances, and we're not proposing to put that adult social care precept into our 21-22 proposals. The government did say that this could be deferred, but obviously that's a discussion for future years. 1% council tax, just for a bit of context, provides about just over £3 million worth of income for us, and is very much reliant on the tax base as well. In terms of financial risks, I think Andrew set them out quite clearly in terms of the ongoing impact of COVID. We have received some notification of grants going into 21-22, and our assumptions are that any additional costs that we're currently experiencing relating to COVID will be funded and have been funded up to date by additional grants from government. The main other area of risk is around the collection rates on council tax and business rates, what surplus or deficits will be brought forward from the districts, and also what information they provide us on the basis of the council tax and business rates basis for setting next year's budgets. We've also assumed some savings targets for future years in our forecast, and obviously key risk there about being able to deliver those savings. In terms of proposed use of earmark reserves, we currently have a financial volatility earmark reserve of just over 52 million. As the proposals stand for 21-22, we won't need to draw down on that. In fact, we can probably add some in, but clearly we'll present the final position on that for February executive and for council. We've also identified some reserves in adult social care that can be used to support the cost pressures in that area. So that's the revenue impact. I'll just swiftly move on to the capital programme. We've refreshed the programme and just updated some of the programme projects. So the gross programme spend for 21-22 is proposed to be 204 million, and that meets our capital strategy in terms of affordability. A couple of key changes to the capital programme are set out on page 21 of your report. Key changes being building communities of specialist provision. The gross programme's now been set at 86 million, with additional spend mainly being met by additional government grants for special need provision in schools. The major road scheme budgets on the Lincoln Eastern Bypass and Grantham Southern Relief Roads have been increased to reflect current forecast costs. And some of this has been offset by pushing back some of the future years uncommitted programme on the Best Boston development schemes and the local highways improvement pinch points coastal routes. That will better reflect planned spend and also to ensure that our 21-22 programme is affordable. We've also put in there the paper and card rollout on waste to be able to roll out that programme to provide bins to separate out the paper and card from our waste recycling. We've also put in the report that the DfT announced the allocation of 110 million to support the North Wycombe Relief Road. The next step on that being that we now need to build up a detailed business case for the scheme to get the ongoing support for that scheme. The full details of the capital programme is included at Appendix C on page 53. Following on from that, the Development Fund initiative. So the council approved a number of development bids last year, and we've included an update on the spend profile of these developments that are included at page 61, Appendix D of your report. And just to highlight, there is 1.4 million in that initiative pot that's still not allocated. And just the last thing for me to highlight, we have to set out our flexible use of capital receipt strategy. This is a requirement that we have from government to set out our strategy in terms of the government flexibility that we've been given to use capital receipts to fund specific revenue costs. Our proposed strategy for 21-22 is not to use capital receipts to fund revenue costs, but to use them to repay existing loans and support future spend of the capital programme. So hopefully that's a quick whistle-stop tour of the key points in the report, and I'll hand back to you, Leader.
Thank you very much for that, Michelle. As always, a comprehensive explanation of the budget situation. So, obviously, questions, comments from people. But can I just ask? You obviously did mention the 14.6 savings and additional income. Can you just confirm that? Well, what are you anticipating in terms of effective frontline delivery on those savings next year?
So there's been no proposals to reduce any frontline service provision as part of those savings. It's all predominantly just efficiencies and an additional income. So income generated from selling services, some more efficient use of things like printing, things like that. So no planned reduction in any frontline services.
Thank you. Just yes, I think it's important that we do stress that. Although I think it's important that savings are always found, and that has enabled us to come in with a budget which is in pretty much on target and the same for next year, subject of course to all the caveats which Andrew has told us, which are quite substantial at the moment. In terms of obviously this, any other comments? Has any of the executive got any comments, please? I've got Councillor Rodwell, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just to say that obviously with adults and children, usually we're on the good step, not the naughty step, so to speak. But I mean, the COVID pandemic has affected both those services. As Michelle spoke about some of our contracts, we've had to put more money money into some of those. And with children's as well, we've had a lot more children come into care, and we had nowhere to place them in the county. They've had to be placed out of county. But we are on a project now to actually try and deliver 2 more children's homes, so some of these children can come back, and we know we can look after them far more cheaply than placing them in out-of-county placements. But I think there has been really some pressures in some of our services, which we weren't able to react to quickly. So, but I just want to assure my colleagues that we are on with trying to reduce these cost pressures, trying to do some invest to save measures so that we can actually bring that budget as much back into line as possible.
Yeah, I suppose at that point it's probably worthwhile just acknowledging that we have received quite a bit of money from the government to help us with the extra costs and lost income with coronavirus, which of course is out without this report. But just want a quick summary of that, please, Michelle.
So in terms of general COVID grants, we've received £44 million up until for 2021 for the current financial year, and obviously notification of additional 15 million going into the new year. We've been able to recover lost sales fees and charges, so we're expecting to recover about £4 million worth of lost income due to sales fees and charges losses. We've obviously had a lot of separate grants, things like the Contained Outbreak Management Fund, the Infection Prevention Control Fund, some of the hardship money supporting families. So we've had a number of specific scheme grants as well to support additional costs that are coming through. It's probably also worth mentioning that all of these cost pressures were kind of accumulating before COVID. COVID has exacerbated a lot of them, but they are part of our transformation programme. So very much key pieces of work going on to look at how we can manage some of that demand and the cost pressures as part of the transformation programme as well.
Thank you. And that, of course, is one-off money, not which is why it's not in the general budget. It is separate, and we're reporting back to government as we spend that money which has been allocated. Yeah,
we've been reporting back monthly to MHCLG on the general grant. We're doing some returns on the sales fees and charges to MHCLG, and obviously reporting back use things of like the Contained Outbreak Management Fund as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Obviously, it has been a challenging time for us in terms of this year's budget, but I think it's congratulations that we will. It looks like we'll be more or less on target with support from government, of course. And indeed, we are hopefully able to set a sensible budget next year. I don't know, Councillor Davey, we know that businesses are, obviously desperately struggling, many of them, not all of them, but they are really with this continued lockdown. So I don't know what you want to report in terms of what the business world is, how it's coping with all of this coronavirus situation.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I would just say this, I think, that obviously the continuing extension of the coronavirus pandemic in terms of its impact on the business world is obviously concerning. Government has been very supportive of the business community in terms of grant packages and supports, and a further 4 billion announced this morning. But there are elements of our Lincolnshire community in the business world who've had no help or support at all, Leader. And these are the people I'm most concerned about. The retail and hospitality sector has a lot of very small micro businesses that are not set up with rateable values. And the way Treasury funds is based on rateable values, as you will be aware. And there are people who don't operate in that way, and they've had no help or support at all. So I have some real concerns about that and what we can do to help them. So I'm hoping to have a discussion with the executive in February about some proposals around how we could help and support. I think the Lincolnshire economy is resilient. I think a lot of businesses are saying that they are ready to get on with everything once the COVID pandemic is behind us. That can't come soon enough for the business world. But as we all know, the one thing that they need more than anything is certainty about the future. And at this moment in time, we cannot be able to give a certain date about when things will return to a place where they can trade and do business normally. So the sooner we can get to that, the better. But I think Lincolnshire's economy will be more resilient than some other parts of the country, and we need to do everything we can to help. And I'll be bringing some recommendations to you, Leader, and to the executive in February.
Yeah, thank you. Obviously, we go out to consultation on this budget, and it'll be interesting to see part of the consultation, of course, is with the business community, what their views on not only our budget, but in terms of how they are sort of feeling regarding their contribution to Lincolnshire economy. So I think that is, although we think we've got problems, I think many businesses have, a lot of businesses have gone already, and I think the challenge will be probably to try and make sure there is as many survive as possible, but we'll talk about it in the future, I think.
I would just add, Lee, if I could, yeah. I think the issue for us as an organisation is as businesses reconstruct themselves, we are not going to have so many people inhabiting offices and rateable value premises going forward. We're going to have a lot more people working remotely, working from home. How that then impacts in the medium to long term on collection rates in terms of business rates and what business rates look like. I think the whole business rate structure will need to be reformed by central government, and I think that will have impacts in terms of what we're saying as an organisation, in terms of fairer funding, in terms of how we are financed by central government and what we're allowed to raise locally.
Thank you. I think that's a very fair point, because we are reliant on a top-up, or particularly for business rates under the current system, and that is one of the many concerns we've got in terms of if there starts to be shortfalls in business rates, that could affect us. On the positive side, there are many people who are now relocating from the likes of London to Lincolnshire and working from Lincolnshire remotely. So that is a positive, of course. And I think I don't know whether Andy's got any views, but I think there is an increased demand for larger houses, shall we say, the 4 bedrooms, or people on higher incomes. Is that what is being found?
Morning, Leader. Yeah, some of the information we've been receiving from the property side of local businesses, estate agents and such like, has indicated there's been an increased demand for that type of property. So in that regard, obviously large family houses are potentially sort of like an area of growth. Obviously that's now got to filter through in terms of what the house building industry can deliver. But obviously as well, over the last few months, there hasn't been an immediate downward trend in terms of the housing market. So again, it would look as though there's sort of attractions of coming to a place like Lincolnshire, reflecting the access to space, are things that we can build on. Obviously that does then give us a challenge in terms of making sure that we maintain the pressure for delivering digital and broadband facilities, because again, that remote working is reliant on the technology that goes hand in hand with it.
Thank you. Okay, so I think in summary then, we think we are in a reasonable place, certainly a lot better place than many other councils, and I think that is just the fact that we have been very robust in terms of driving out those savings and cutting our cloth according to what we have to spend, and I think that is a valediction of the strategy we have taken over this time. Obviously, the government, although it has been generous with its short-term one-off support, I think one of the disappointments of the budget settlement for local government was, although it wasn't just the fair funding review, which Michelle talked about, and the business rates review, the other thing which has not been addressed is the green paper on adult social care that was. So again, I don't think Glenn's with us, is he? But obviously there are some massive issues there which are looming across the whole of local government. So what the government did, in effect, instead of effectively addressing that issue and in terms of central government allocations, it continued with the frankly disappointing methodology of just allowing councils like ourselves to up council tax more. So if you'll see in some of the reports, they talk about spending power raising. Well, a lot of that spending power for us is the ability to heap more council tax on the residents of Lincolnshire. So I think that's quite a difficult political decision for us as councillors at the county council, because although we do need to make sure our budget is sustainable and robust going forward, and if you looked at it purely financially, the more you can get into your base budget, as it's called, and raise your sort of base council tax for future years, as a finance person, that's probably the best answer you can give and get that money into the base. But as elected politicians, I think we also have to be very much aware of our residents, and we've also known that Lincolnshire has never been a high wage economy. And there are, there is usually full employment in Lincolnshire, but it tends to be at the lower levels of income. And of course, a lot of people, as we are well aware, it's not just businesses, they are struggling and suffering because of the nearly, will be year effect at least, of the coronavirus restrictions. So I think it would be morally incorrect, and I think my colleagues agree with me, we all agree, that at a time of such difficulty certainly for residents and businesses, because obviously the more money we take out of residents' pockets, the less money they will then have to spend in the economic community. But if our budget is looking fairly sort of robust at the moment, we think that it's not the right time to take that 5% increase, which we would be entitled to. So I think that is the right decision. And as Michelle has said, that decision can be deferred to a following year. And I have to stress that doesn't mean to say we are going to take it next year. What it means to say we'll have to wait and see how all those imponderables, which Andrew outlined at the beginning, how they actually pan out in terms of what we do. So this time we are going to effectively decline the extra 3%, which we think will help support not only individual households, but also businesses as well. And I think that is the right and proper thing to do. And I don't really think we should be in the business of just piling up more council tax on people when we have a reasonably balanced budget. And of course, we have reserves as well, which we have at our disposal. Again, those are one-off costs. So that is the proposal. And obviously there is a large capital programme, building programme as well, of £200 million approximately. I think, Michelle, there's lots of major schemes going on, and good news about North Highcombe, Relief Road, as well as the Grantham and the Spalding roads as well. And we've got lots of other projects going on. So although we are not increasing council tax as much as we could, we are still very ambitious to actually provide a vibrant support to our local economy, both directly and indirectly. So that's where we are. So unless any other member of the executive wants to add anything, there are the recommendations. Does anybody else wish to come in on anything? Okay. So on page 9, recommendations to approve these budget proposals, which will then go out to consultation. I'll go to the vote now. So obviously, if anybody who is not a member of the executive, please close down their screen, and then we'll just have hopefully 7 of us on the screen. I'm still seeing quite a few people who aren't executive councillors on the screen, at my screen anyway, but I don't know if it's my screen or something else. Nigel, what have you got on your screen? Because I've got all sorts of people on my screen.
I've got 7 members of the executive leader.
Right, well, my screen doesn't say that at all. So can I rely on, so all those, yes. I will vote in favour. Could everybody else vote as well so Nigel can see? Because my screen hasn't cleared. So I'm in favour. Nigel, everybody else?
Yes, all in favour, leader. That's unanimous.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Okay, very good. So that's so we'll see what happens when we go out to consultation and what comes back. And of course, we'll have more information in terms of from district councils and the rest. Thank you for that. So then we move on to item 6 then, which is it's been a scrutiny review of the developer contributions from this is developers for building houses and other development. Okay, so who's going to start on this then? is it straight to Linda Wotton, or is that right, Linda? Councillor Wotton? You chair,
Yes,
I believe.
Leader, yes, thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everyone. As the Chairman of Scrutiny Panel A, I am pleased to present to you today the final report from the Developer Contribution Scrutiny Review, which was approved by the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board on 17th December 2020. The review started in October 2020 after we were asked to undertake a short, urgent review by Executive Councillor Colin Davey and group leaders on developer contributions. The panel met 3 times over October and November and considered the proposals in the government's planning for the future white paper, what developer contributions are and how the process for requesting them works in Lincolnshire, how councillors are involved in the process, and how we can maximise the benefits from developer contributions for our local communities. The panel identified that there was a need for councillor training on developer contributions and more engagement by councillors in the planning process. A centralised system needs to be developed to request, record and monitor developer contributions across the council, which should then improve the Section 106 income received and a need for appropriate lines of accountability and strategic oversight of Section 106 agreements. The panel recognised that a more joined-up approach with the district councils would enable more collaborative working to maximise the benefits to local communities. This will become crucial if the white paper proposals for developer contributions are introduced, as Lincolnshire could receive much lower levels of funding in the future. The 6 recommendations contained in the report aim to address the issues identified. In summary, to maximise the benefits from developer contributions, there are 4 key points that need to be addressed by the County Council. These are: 1. What does the Council want developer contributions for? 2. Does the Council receive enough income to mitigate the impacts of development? 3. How does the Council decide which schemes go ahead when there is not enough income? And 4. Does the Council manage the income it receives effectively? These 4 points can be addressed by the Council through leadership, decision-making and management. Leadership will be achieved through recommendations 1, 2 and 5. Decision-making will be achieved through recommendation 4. Management will be achieved through recommendations 3 and 6. That's the report. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much you, Councillor Wotton, and your panel for coming doing this swift review. I think I'll now pass on to Councillor Parker from the overview and scrutiny perspective, because obviously you are parenting this review.
Indeed. Could I begin by suggesting that we might look at page 67 and 68, which I wanted to go through briefly to reflect the views of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board. The first big point was that we thought it was an excellent piece of work, and we really commend Councillor Wotton and the committee for the work that they've done. Some of the points that we made are what I'm going to call process points, which is about what the executive should do with the report. And the second bullet point on page 67 is about circulating the paper, the recommendations to district and parish councils for their what we might call educational purposes. Similarly, we made a recommendation to include the word negative impact to make it clearer that we wanted to get across that the council sought to minimise the negative, that we wanted to see little negative impact on residents, communities and businesses. Similarly, in much the same way, we feel as though the executive may want to consider seriously, along with district councils, in robustly dealing with the government communication on the planning of the future white paper. We noted that in the recommendation that the scrutiny review took a view which wanted to avoid any negative impacts of the white paper on Lincolnshire, and explaining our reasons. And it may well be that the executive wants to take that forward. In much the same way, we wanted to show our support for the argument that we do not want to see an erosion of local democracy and limits on the ability of local people to input into the planning process, which seemed to be a strong feature of the Planning for the Future white paper. Again, within our council, the executive may want to reflect on the idea of having a clear system, which Councillor Wootton mentioned, to monitor developer contributions, to ensure that the money that we got as a council was received and was not put at financial risk. Section 106 agreements have been signed in good faith, but have not always materialised in terms of income to the council because of issues to do with developer contribution problems, cash flow, for example. We wanted to see, at least to point out, a need for collaboration between all the councils in Lincolnshire to ensure that the same message was being given to developers and the process was fit for purpose. So it may well be that we want to share with all the districts this particular report. A big challenge was in relation to the planning applications being approved by the local planning authority, and then nothing much happened with them. Developers were getting round the planning legislation time limit for development by laying the foundations to particular buildings, but not then completing. And that's a point that results in blight on local communities, but also is a way of, in a sense, avoiding the responsibilities that developers have got. We recognised and wanted to stress the point that was made within the report about good working relationship with developers, and that collaboration between developers and local authorities is seriously important. And we thought that it was important that our council and other councils needed to be clear with residents and the local communities about what happened with the money received from developer contributions and what benefits had been achieved. So there was a space there for us to develop, we thought, and I'm sure that the review committee actually supported that in identifying the benefits of Section 106 money. And finally, the point that we wanted to stress as well was that actions to implement these recommendations, if the executive agree, should be reviewed periodically and updated where necessary to ensure that they were still fit for purpose. This is a good report as of now, excellent in fact, but we wanted to make sure that as times changed, that there was an opportunity for us to reflect and alter our particular approach to Section 106. Those were the thoughts of OSMB, who had a really good discussion with Councillor Wootton at the OSMB meeting, and we support and commend this paper to the executive.
Thank you very much again to the scrutiny efforts. This is a really important and very timely issue we need to have a review of, and I know Councillor Dave is going to come on in a minute. But and in terms of, we already know that throughout Greater Lincolnshire there's going to be another 100,000 houses over the next 25 years or so. That is a huge amount of money which should come to local governments, and this isn't sort of extra money. This is just to deal with the effects of those extra houses. So, for example, we've just built the Lincoln Eastern bypass. Well, there's a lot of money, a big contribution anticipated, which is in agreement with the district councils where that money comes in. So I think it's really important that we maximise the amount of money which comes in, but make sure as the scrutiny reports have obviously clearly identified, that is properly managed and coordinated. One of the challenges we have in two-tier areas, of course, is that the council which has to provide most of the infrastructure in terms of roads, schools, and stuff like that is not the council which gives permission. So it does require coordination and cooperation between both tiers of both of the councils that give the planning permission and also the council which then has to hopefully spend most of the money. So I think thank you very much everybody for doing that. And I think there's some key issues there, and I think there's still some unanswered questions, shall we say, in some areas where we should need to, Councillor Davies, the appropriate portfolio holder, needs to look at in terms how we achieve what we want to achieve with all this potential extra funding. So I'll hand over then to you, Councillor Davies, just to give your initial reaction to the report.
Thank you very much, Leader. Firstly, I want to thank Councillor Wotton and all the members of the scrutiny panel for their work on this subject. I think they have been diligent and they've gone through the issues, and the report I think laid out in front of us means that they have really covered this subject well. And I also thank Councillor Parker for Overview and Scrutiny Management Board's review of the report and his comments today. I think you, Leader, have touched on the key issues for us as an organisation. With the future growth of housing in Lincolnshire, and the point that Andy Gutherson made earlier about the demand for bigger, higher quality homes, the 4-bedroom homes of the future, there are going to be more demands and more pressures on the system. And it is really important that we as an organisation get our responses to planning applications right, and that we get the right level of contributions going forward. I'm very happy to accept the recommendations today, but I think we as an executive may need to consider how we actually develop an action plan on the basis of this report. I think it's great foundations to build upon. So I think it's probably timely, Leader, and we can have a discussion about this, that maybe all the members of the executive who are concerned with the growth agenda, myself, Councillor Davies, Councillor Pole, we get together and have a discussion with our officers about how we take this report forward and make sure we put in place an action plan and work with our partners in the districts to develop this excellent report into a piece of real tangible delivery mechanisms for the future. So I'll leave it there, and then I'll come back in with any questions or thoughts that the other members of the executive have, Leader.
Thank you very much for that. Yes, I think so. Councillor Bradwell was first, I think. Thank you, Colin, for that.
Yeah, I just want to agree with what's been said, and thank you, Linda, and your committee for doing a really good report. This is one of my bones of contention with my fellow district councillors who I work very closely in my division. Some parts of East Lindsey are very, very sought after, and all we seem to get is houses after houses, and yet then we sometimes miss out on actually getting some contribution for schools or other facilities in our communities. And it is really the main thing that some of the residents talk about. Some of our GPs are very slow at putting in an application to get an extension to their surgeries, and I think they have got slightly better over the last couple of years, but I think it is a big problem for growing communities that actually they do get all the housing, but they don't get a car park or something like that to help the community. It's not about accepting the new people, but it's about making living in a community much better with 1,000 more houses. That's all I'd like to say, Mr. Chair. I think it's good, and hopefully we can work with the districts to make things better.
Thank you. I think Councillor Worth.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think it's one thing I get in my mailbox more than anything when we get a large amount of housing coming forward is people really do want to see that infrastructure in place alongside any future housing. It's a really important issue, so it's really key that the districts and the county can work together flexibly as much as possible, and I hope certainly in my part of the area we manage to do that quite a lot of the time. I think one of the big concerns for me in the government's white paper is the way they're proposing that contributions will be paid at the end, which does have a major implication for the county having to forward fund a lot of these big infrastructure schemes. And if I'm honest, if I was a developer and I didn't have to pay until the end of the scheme, what's the incentive for me to complete the scheme? So there's quite a number of issues there that I think the government need to look at quite closely, and I think this report has highlighted a number of those. So well done to Councillor Wootton and the committee for highlighting some of those areas. But I think closer cooperation and we people do need, our residents do need that infrastructure. It's really important. And I do worry that the new paper is going to give us less opportunities and less money to be able to do with to provide that infrastructure. Thank you, Chairman.
I think that's it is my major concern as well, because what we don't want is all the houses before the infrastructure, which is why some years now, and certainly in terms of major housing developments, whether it's, for example, in Lincoln, in Spalding, in Grantham, we build the road first, or the infrastructure first, particularly, to make sure that that we don't get loads of houses and even greater congestion and damage to economic activity. So that does put the council at risk, and we all know in the past, and I just sometimes wonder whether people in government don't seem to understand that. We've in Lincolnshire, we've had issues in the past where there's been a trigger for action in terms of infrastructure being provided, and the developer just sits on just before the trigger and then moves on to some other site to start developing there. And this is clearly unacceptable. I do think it's the government certainly needs to look at this very carefully, because it's in great danger of ending up with terrible congestion and problems due to the fact that some developers can play the system. So I do think we need to be quite robust in response to the white paper, which my understanding is they've looked at the numbers of houses which are going to be allocated, but don't seem to have looked at much else. So I think there is a bit of a ticking time bomb there in terms of what we're going to do. The report did also talk about some flexibility in terms of local development and how locally that is allocated. I'm talking now for the smaller developments, shall we say, that where they're probably, I was hoping to see some discussion about whether more local flexibility could be allowed for local parish councils or local councillors to actually at least have an input with their local knowledge to actually get something a bit more which would actually be more satisfactory and acceptable when they've got to accept the extra housing. So I don't know in the report there whether anybody can help me with that. But who we got? I think which officer it is who we got here can just perhaps help me out with that a bit. Was it you, Andy, or is it going to be somebody else?
I think Andy should be able to assist.
Yes. Thank you, Andy.
Yeah, so I think both yourself and Councillor Davey have sort of indicated one of the challenges and issues in the context of this, in the relationship between ourselves as an infrastructure provider and the local planning authorities that are the actual decision makers. I think one of the things you also have to remember is that the whole purpose behind Section 106 contributions is that they are designed to mitigate the impact of development.
Yeah.
And in that regard, there is a clear case law situation of if you aren't mitigating the impact of the development, you should then be considering whether that development should actually go ahead or not. Obviously, in the context of getting a view or opinion about what the impacts of a development are, local knowledge can obviously be quite sort of crucial and central to actually understanding the day-to-day issues and problems that people will actually experience. The challenge with that, though, then becomes one of, again, the way case law has developed over the years, in terms of demonstrating the need for that particular element of infrastructure. And it's an item that has sort of exercised greater legal minds than around this table today, in the context of actually what is right, what is wrong. And the planning authorities always seem to err on the side of caution in regard to looking at what the developer's side of the position is, not necessarily the local community, local perspective on matters. So it continues to be an area where getting the voice heard is a challenge in how the planning system actually operates. And the white paper that's been referred to has continued to sort of start pushing the emphasis and the balance further to the developers rather than to local communities. It's an area where, in the context of comments that Councillor Davey made about engaging effectively with the districts as planning authorities, it is an area where we need to make greater efforts to actually be on the same page of them. And Councillor Parker will also be aware that in the context of the last scrutiny, Overview and Scrutiny Management Board, on the same agenda, he received an update in terms of the purpose behind the production of infrastructure funding statements, which are supposed to set out more clearly actually what are those aims and ambitions from infrastructure, and that is a requirement for that to be produced on an annual basis. From a monitoring perspective, if I could just add, if we collectively see this as effectively a funding programme and report on it as a funding programme, our ability to actually address the sort of changes that occur and be on top of it is an area where I think we could address the comments that Councillor Parker made in the context of actually being flexible and keeping the matter under review.
Thank you. Councillor Bradwell, your hand is still up. Is that an old hand?
Gone to sleep, Mr. Chairman. Haven't taken it down.
Yeah, we're all supposed to be doing it on chat, but we'll forgive you this time. Okay, Councillor Davey then. Obviously, I think you've indicated that this is very much a starting point, and the recommendations do suggest that we come up with an action plan. So unless any other member of the executive wants to come in, I'll just let you wind up and promote the recommendations.
Yeah, yes, thank you very much, Leader. Just to reiterate, yes, I think this is a good piece of work. It's laid the foundations for what we need to do going forward. And I think that myself and the other members of the executive who are concerned with this area should all get together with our directors to discuss how we actually embed the recommendations and develop them into a programme and an action plan going forward. I think Andy has mentioned a way of maybe having a reporting mechanism going forward. I think that's good. So I think, today I would recommend we accept the recommendations of the report and move forward, recognising that they're a good foundation for us to work in this area and develop actions and a programme going forward, and to try and make sure that we are robustly defending our local position as regards the white paper. Because if these changes are embedded by government, it will cause us a lot of problems and issues going forward. And I think we do need to robustly defend our position as regards that white paper. So I think that's a stream of work I will take forward along with our directors, and making sure government hears our message here in Lincolnshire. But I think for today, it's a good report. I think it's a good foundation to move forward, and we should wholeheartedly accept it. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. So then on page 63, then the recommendations are there that we have considered it, and Councillor Davey, as the portfolio holder, is recommending that we accept all the recommendations, and then we bring forward an action plan, which is basically to coordinate and refine our whole policy regarding these developed contributions. So again, we need to vote on that. So if everybody could try and leave my screen, it might be just relying on Nigel again to do that for me. But this is looking better. So I think I've got half the executive there. So so you're proposing that, Councillor Davey. I will second that. Everybody else in favour, please now show with your hand. Have we got, how's it looking, Nigel?
I can only see, Councillor Bradwell. I just need to see Councillor Bradwell.
You need Councillor Bradwell's screen on. That's it. There she goes. She's Right, that's good. Okay, have we all voted?
Yes, that's unanimous, Leader.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for that. Right, with that then, that concludes this meeting of the executive. Thank you very much for your attendance, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll see you virtually soon. Thank you.